The gilded cage had become my sanctuary, or at least I'd convinced myself it was. 22 years, and every breath dictated by him. Senator Harrison Thorne, my father, my jailer. The world saw a doting patriarch, a loving daughter gracefully accepting her place in Washington's high society. They saw galas, philanthropic endeavors, and a young woman poised for a life of privilege. They didn't see the iron bars forged of expectation, the whispered threats masked as concern, the chilling awareness that my life wasn't my own. Tonight was different. Tonight, the rules shattered like cheap glass. The auction. The Thorne Foundation's annual charity auction was always a spectacle. Diamond-draped socialites, ambitious politicians, and shadowy figures whose wealth whispered of illicit dealings. I hated it. I hated the forced smiles, the empty conversations, the feeling of being paraded around like a prized pony. This year, the star attraction was a private dinner with yours truly. All proceeds to benefit underprivileged youth, of course. How noble, how utterly, disgustingly calculated. I stood on the small stage, bathed in the harsh glare of spotlights, my silk gown feeling like a noose. My father beamed beside me, his hand possessively resting on my lower back. "Isn't she lovely?" he boomed, his voice amplified through the ballroom. A truly unique opportunity to support a worthy cause and enjoy the company of my beautiful daughter. The bidding started predictably enough. A few polite offers from men old enough to be my grandfather, quickly followed by the sharks. Senator Caldwell, a man with eyes that lingered too long, made a play. Then, Mr. Volkov, a Russian businessman whose reputation preceded him like a storm cloud. The numbers climbed higher and higher. My stomach churned. Then he arrived. Not physically, but his presence resonated through the room like a low-frequency hum. A collective intake of breath, a subtle shift in posture among the power players. Even my father seemed apprehensive. The screen displaying the highest bid flickered, and a new name appeared. Anonymous. The number was astronomical, double the previous bid. Then it climbed again, and again. The auctioneer, a seasoned professional, could barely contain his excitement. My father's smile tightened. I felt a tremor of something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Finally, the gavel fell. Sold to Anonymous for an unprecedented sum. The room erupted in murmurs. Who was Anonymous, and why would they pay such an exorbitant amount for a single dinner? My father steered me off the stage, his grip tighter than before. "Interesting," he murmured, his eyes narrowed. "Very interesting indeed." The summons. I expected to be ushered into my father's study for a stern lecture, a veiled threat disguised as paternal concern. Instead, I was led to the rarely used east wing of the mansion, a place shrouded in shadows and whispered rumors of my late mother's hidden treasures. It was there, in the opulent drawing room, that I found him. He stood with his back to me, gazing out at the manicured gardens, a figure of stark elegance, tall, broad-shouldered, with an aura of controlled power that prickled my skin. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, the fabric whispering of untold wealth. He was the physical embodiment of the word dangerous. He turned, and the breath caught in my throat. His face was obscured by a meticulously crafted silver mask, leaving only his eyes visible, eyes that were a startling shade of glacial blue, piercing and intense. They held a knowledge that seemed to strip away my carefully constructed facade, exposing the raw, vulnerable woman beneath. "Miss Thorne," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that sent shivers down my spine. "I trust you are prepared?" Prepared for what? I wanted to ask, but the words wouldn't form. My father stood beside him, his face pale, his usual arrogance replaced with a disconcerting nervousness. "Elara," he said, his voice strained. This is Mr. Argent. He has certain expectations." Mr. Argent. The name meant nothing, yet everything. It was a promise of chaos, a whisper of rebellion, a chance, a terrifying, exhilarating chance to finally break free. "Expectations?" I finally managed to croak, my voice barely audible. "What kind of expectations?" Mr. Argent took a step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "The kind," he murmured, "that will change your life forever." He raised a gloved hand and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from my face. The touch was feather-light, yet it sent a jolt of electricity through me. "You see, Miss Thorne, I didn't just buy a dinner. I bought you." My blood ran cold. He couldn't mean. My father cleared his throat, his gaze darting between us. "Mr. Argent has invested heavily in my foundation, Elara. It is imperative that you cooperate fully. Think of it as an extended internship. An internship? I almost laughed. This was far beyond any internship. This was a transaction. I was a commodity, bartered and sold to the highest bidder. The rules had not only been broken, they had been pulverized. I looked at Mr. Argent, at the masked face and the glacial eyes, and a strange sense of calm settled over me. Fear warred with a nascent sense of defiance. If my life was to be dictated by someone, maybe, just maybe, it was better to be dictated by a mystery wrapped in power than a father fueled by control. "And what," I asked, my voice stronger now, "are the terms of this internship, Mr. Argent?" He smiled, a slow, predatory curve of his lips beneath the mask. "The terms, Miss Thorne, are quite simple. You will obey my every command. You will learn to trust me. And you will discover the true meaning of power and pleasure." He extended his hand. "Do we have an agreement?" I looked at his hand, at the black glove that seemed to promise both salvation and damnation. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the point of no return. I took his hand. "We have an agreement." The contract was sealed. The cage was still there, but the lock was now firmly in his hand. The first rule he set was immediate. I was to leave with him that night. No luggage, no farewells. I was his completely. As we walked out of the mansion, leaving my father standing frozen in the doorway, I couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration. I was stepping into the unknown, into a world of shadows and secrets. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also liberating. The driver opened the door of a sleek, black car. As I slid into the leather seat, Mr. Argent followed, his presence filling the small space. He didn't speak, but I could feel his gaze on me, assessing, calculating. The car pulled away from the Thorne mansion, leaving behind the gilded cage and the shattered rules. My new life had begun. But as the city lights blurred past the window, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a deal with the devil, and I had no idea what the price would be. Next chapter. The next chapter promises a deeper dive into the power dynamics between Elara and Mr. Argent, the unveiling of his true motives, and the exploration of the dark world he inhabits. Will Elara find freedom or merely trade one cage for another? The suspense is only beginning. The air in the penthouse thickened with a tension that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside. Rain lashed against the panoramic windows, mirroring the tempest brewing within me. Across the chessboard, Damien's eyes glinted, reflecting the cold fire of ambition. He'd cornered me, not just on the board, but in a game far more dangerous. He reached out, his long fingers hovering over his queen. "Checkmate, Isabella." His voice was a low, resonant hum, a vibration that seemed to settle deep within my bones. It wasn't a gloat, it was a statement of fact, delivered with the clinical precision I'd come to expect. My own gaze flickered over the board. He was right. There was no escape. Not this time. Surrender was the only option, a bitter pill to swallow. I met his gaze, refusing to show any sign of weakness. "So it seems." Damien steepled his fingers, a predatory glint in his eyes. "But surrender doesn't have to be defeat, Isabella. It can be a renegotiation." My breath hitched. A renegotiation of what, exactly? Our arrangement? The carefully constructed walls I'd erected around my heart trembled. He was offering me a lifeline, but I knew, instinctively, that the price would be steep. He always extracted a price. I knew that he was going to play my feelings to get what he wanted, and I knew that I would give him every piece of me he asked for if it meant he would feel something similar in return. "What do you propose?" I asked, my voice betraying none of the turmoil within. He leaned forward, the scent of expensive cologne, sandalwood, and something darker, more primal, filling the space between us. "I propose a new game, one with higher stakes and far more interesting rules." My pulse quickened. The stakes were already impossibly high. What could he possibly want that he didn't already have? My cooperation? My loyalty? Or something far more dangerous, my heart? "And what are these?" "Interesting rules," I queried, testing the waters with a careful, almost careless tone. He smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of his lips that sent a shiver down my spine. "The rules are simple, Isabella. You tell me one truth, a truth you've been guarding, something you've never told anyone, a secret. And in exchange, I'll tell you one of mine." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Then, we repeat the game, swapping secrets. Each secret will raise the stakes." My mind raced. He was playing with fire, with us. Sharing secrets was an act of intimacy, a vulnerability I couldn't afford. But the lure of knowing his secrets, of finally seeing behind the carefully constructed mask, was almost irresistible. "What if one of us chooses not to answer?" I questioned, probing the limits of his offer. "Then you concede the initial game. Checkmate stands, and the agreement is concluded," Damien replied smoothly, his gaze never wavering, the fire within it intense. I hesitated. What did I stand to lose? I had to think strategically. Conceding would put me at a disadvantage, making him suspicious, and I couldn't allow that, but the longer the secrets grew, the more dangerous it was that I could lose myself to him. "Very well," I answered, steeling myself. "I accept your game." A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Satisfaction? Anticipation? Or something darker? "Then let's begin, shall we? Your secret, Isabella." He leaned back, watching me with an unnerving intensity. He already knew my weakness, that I was intrigued by him. This moment of power felt different, more real. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had to choose carefully. A secret that revealed too much would give him leverage. A secret that was too insignificant would insult him, and I knew what he was like when he was angry. I needed something balanced. I took a deep breath. "When I was a child," I began, my voice low, "I used to steal books from the library, not because I couldn't afford them, but because I liked the thrill of getting away with something. It was a small thing, a childhood transgression, but it revealed a hidden part of myself, a rebellious streak, a desire for control." Damien considered my words, his gaze unwavering. "Interesting." He paused. "My turn. The empire that my family owns has an illicit base in the country of San Romero, where I was born and raised. It's my most prized possession because the business started there with my parents. Nobody knows about it except for the few people who manage it. If anyone were to ever find out, it would be the end of our reign." My eyes widened despite myself. That was far more than I had bargained for. A secret that could ruin him, his family, his entire empire. The weight of it settled upon me, a heavy burden of knowledge. I had not expected him to be so vulnerable, so quickly. I had also not expected his vulnerability to arouse me, and that was what scared me the most. "Why tell me this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He shrugged, but I saw the tension in his jaw, the guarded look in his eyes. "Because, Isabella, you needed to know who you were dancing with, and because I trust you, maybe even more than I trust myself." His words were a punch to the gut. Trust from Damien? It was a weapon. I knew it, a carefully crafted tool designed to disarm me. But it worked. A sliver of warmth bloomed in my chest, a dangerous tendril of hope. "Then it's my turn again," I responded, trying to regain control of the situation. "Indeed," he said, watching me. "The next move. The game has changed. Now Isabella knows a dangerous secret, and Damien trusts her more than he trusts himself. But will Isabella lose herself to Damien in the dangerous game? Or will his trust be his downfall?" The air in the penthouse crackled with unspoken tension, thick enough to choke on. Isabella stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, her back to Adrian, the glittering cityscape a mocking reflection of the turmoil inside her. He had revealed too much, too soon. A chink in the armor of Adrian Volkov, the man who held half the world in his palm. It was dangerous knowledge, a loaded weapon she now wielded, whether she wanted to or not. "You shouldn't have told me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The hum of the city felt deafening in the silence that followed. Adrian moved, the soft rustle of his bespoke suit the only sound. He was behind her now, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. It was a deliberate act, a calculated invasion of her personal space. He was reclaiming control, reminding her who held the power here. "Perhaps," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. "But you are not like the others, Isabella. You see more than what I allow." He paused, the silence stretching, taut and expectant. "Tell me, what do you see?" Isabella closed her eyes, fighting the instinctive pull he had on her. It was a siren song, dangerous and alluring. She saw ambition, raw and unyielding. She saw a loneliness that mirrored her own, hidden beneath layers of steel and indifference. And she saw a vulnerability that terrified her because it made him human. Too human. "I see a man who's playing a dangerous game," she said, turning to face him. Her gaze locked with his, unwavering. "And I think he's about to lose." A ghost of a smile touched Adrian's lips, a flicker of amusement in his dark eyes. "Is that so? And what makes you say that?" Because you underestimated me, Isabella said, her voice gaining strength. You thought you could control me, use me as a pawn in your game. But I'm not that easily manipulated, Adrian. Look, I have my own agenda. The smile vanished. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping several degrees. The hunter was now the hunted. He seemed to appreciate the role reversal, though. She could see the anticipation in his eyes. Intriguing, Adrian says, voice laced with steel. And what, pray tell, is your agenda? Isabella stepped closer, closing the distance between them. It was a risky move, a deliberate provocation. But she needed to show him that she wasn't afraid, that she was a force to be reckoned with. To survive, she whispered, her lips inches from his, and maybe, just maybe, to win. His eyes darkened, pupils dilated. The raw, animalistic desire that flared within them was palpable. He wanted her, and that desire, she realized, was another weapon she could use. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. The touch was electric, sending shivers down her spine. Survival is a messy business, Isabella, he murmured, his voice a husky rasp. Are you prepared to get your hands dirty? I already have, she said, meeting his gaze. You just haven't noticed. The kiss was inevitable, a collision of wills and desires. It was nothing like the tentative, exploratory kisses they had shared before. This was a declaration of war, a claiming of territory. His lips were hard, demanding, bruising. She tasted power and danger and a hint of something else, something she couldn't quite define, something that scared her. Isabella kissed him back with equal ferocity, meeting his challenge head-on. She wouldn't be intimidated, she wouldn't be broken. She would use every weapon at her disposal, including her own desire, to survive this game. When they finally broke apart, breathless and shaken, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The kiss had changed everything. It had blurred the lines between predator and prey, between enemy and lover, and it had irrevocably bound them together, for better or for worse. Checkmate, Isabella whispered, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. Adrian chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. The game has only just begun, Isabella, and I assure you, I play to win. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the other room, followed by panicked shouts. Adrian's security team were yelling, but it was impossible to make out what they were saying. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the penthouse into darkness. What the hell is going on? Isabella asked, her voice tight with apprehension. Adrian's arms snaked around her waist, pulling her close. Someone just made their move, he said, his voice grim, and I don't think they're playing by the rules. The darkness was alive with menace, the silence broken only by the frantic shouts of the security team. Isabella could feel Adrian's body tense, his senses on high alert. They were trapped, vulnerable, and the enemy was closing in. A single gunshot ripped through the silence, followed by a scream. Then, nothing. The game had changed. It wasn't just about power and desire anymore. It was about survival. And Isabella knew, with a chilling certainty, that she was now playing for her life. Next steps. Isabella and Adrian must now navigate the dangers of their new reality. The attack on the penthouse has changed the stakes. Isabella must decide whether to fully align herself with Adrian or carve her own path through the chaos. How will they respond to the unknown enemy, and can they trust each other when their lives are on the line? Rain lashed against the windows of the penthouse, mirroring the storm brewing inside Isabella. Alessandro had been gone for hours, a curt phone call the only explanation for his sudden departure. Business, he'd said, his voice clipped and devoid of the warmth she'd begun to crave. Business, as if that single word could explain the tightening knot of anxiety in her stomach. She paced the length of the opulent living room, the city lights blurring into an indistinguishable haze below. The silence was deafening, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain. Isabella felt like a pawn, strategically placed on a board she didn't understand, moved at the whim of a player she was only beginning to know. But she was not a pawn. A dangerous game. Driven by a restlessness she couldn't ignore, Isabella headed to Alessandro's study. The room was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather, lined with books that seemed to whisper secrets in forgotten languages. She'd been warned, subtly but firmly, that this room was off-limits. But the rules, she realized, were made to be broken. The heavy oak door swung inward with a soft click. The air inside was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and something else, something metallic and faintly unsettling. Isabella's fingers brushed against the spines of the books, a silent inventory of Alessandro's mind. He read histories, biographies of ruthless leaders, and treatises on strategy. It was a chilling glimpse into the man behind the charming facade. Her gaze landed on the desk, a sprawling expanse of polished wood. A single, unopened file sat in the center, its label simply reading, Project Nightingale. Isabella hesitated. This was a line she shouldn't cross, but the burning need to understand, to unravel the mysteries surrounding Alessandro, propelled her forward. With trembling hands, she reached for the file. As she did, a photograph slipped out, landing face down on the desk. She picked it up. It was a picture of her. Not a candid shot, but a posed one, taken weeks before she'd even met Alessandro. She was walking down a busy street in Rome, oblivious to the camera's gaze. A chill ran down her spine. He had been watching her. The file contained more photographs, each one documenting her life with meticulous detail. Her apartment, her friends, her work, every aspect of her existence had been scrutinized, analyzed, cataloged. Isabella felt a wave of nausea. She was a subject, an object of study, not a lover, not a partner. Then she saw it. A name, highlighted in bold red ink, Lorenzo Vivaldi. Her father's name, but next to it, scrawled in Alessandro's unmistakable handwriting, were two words that shattered her world. Asset acquired. The truth revealed. The room seemed to spin. Isabella stumbled back, clutching the desk for support. Her father. Alessandro knew about her father, and he considered her. An asset? A tool to be used? Betrayal clawed at her throat, choking her with its venomous grip. The romantic fairy tale she'd allowed herself to believe in dissolved into a bitter, acrid reality. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Alessandro. He was back. Isabella's mind raced. She had to hide the file, to pretend she knew nothing. But as she frantically tried to gather the scattered papers, a new emotion surged through her. Anger. She wouldn't be his pawn. She would play his game, but on her own terms. Previous belief. Alessandro is a complex but ultimately good man, capable of love and redemption. Current reality. Alessandro is a calculating manipulator who views her as a means to an end. Her father's involvement confirms a deeper, more sinister plot. The game has changed. It's no longer about love, it's about survival. She straightened her dress, smoothed her hair, and took a deep breath. When Alessandro entered the study, his eyes narrowed, taking in the scene with a predatory gaze. "Isabella," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "What are you doing here?" She met his gaze, her own eyes hardening with a resolve she hadn't known she possessed. "I was looking for you," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I wanted to know more about your business." Alessandro's expression didn't change, but Isabella could sense the tension coiling within him. He knew she'd seen the file. "My business is not something you need to concern yourself with," he said, taking a step closer. His hand reached out, caressing her cheek. It was a gesture of intimacy, but Isabella felt only revulsion. She stepped back, breaking his touch. "But I am concerned," she said, her voice rising, "especially when that business involves my father." The silence that followed was thick and heavy, broken only by the drumming rain. Alessandro's eyes darkened, his face hardening into an impassive mask. "What do you know?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Isabella smiled, a cold, brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Enough," she said. "I know enough to know that I've been played. But the game isn't over, Alessandro. In fact, it's just beginning." She reached into her purse, pulled out a small ornate box, and placed it on the desk between them. It was the chess set he'd given her, the one he claimed was a symbol of their connection. "Checkmate," she said, her voice laced with ice. "Your move." With that, she turned and walked out of the study, leaving Alessandro standing alone in the rain-swept darkness, the unopened file and the chess set his only companions. The storm outside raged on, a fitting soundtrack to the war that had just begun. The stakes are raised. Isabella's discovery in Alessandro's study irrevocably altered her perception of their relationship. She transitions from a naive romantic to a strategic player, determined to uncover the truth and protect herself. This chapter ends with Isabella seizing control, signaling the start of a dangerous game of cat and mouse with Alessandro. The air in the penthouse thrummed with unspoken tension. Rain lashed against the panoramic windows, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. Alessandro stood across the room, a figure sculpted from shadows and secrets, the city lights painting him in a stark, almost cruel beauty. He hadn't touched me since the revelation, hadn't spoken beyond clipped orders to his staff. Now, finally, he turned, his gaze dark and assessing, pinning me to the spot. "You know," he said, his voice a low rasp that sent shivers down my spine despite my anger, more than I intended, more than anyone should. My chin lifted. "You manipulated me, used me to get to him." A flicker of something, regret, crossed his face, but it was gone before I could be certain. "It wasn't supposed to be like this, Isabella. You weren't supposed to matter." The words were a physical blow. "So what now? Am I just another loose end to be dealt with?" I hated the tremor in my voice. He closed the distance between us with predatory grace. I refused to flinch, meeting his gaze head-on. "Don't be dramatic. You're too valuable to simply eliminate." His fingers brushed my cheek, a feather-light touch that belied the steel in his eyes. "You have a choice, Isabella, a difficult one, but a choice nonetheless." He paused, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "Loyalty, or opportunity?" "Opportunity?" I echoed, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "To do what? Sell my soul even further?" "To take back your power," he murmured, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "To use the knowledge you have to your advantage, to destroy the man who orchestrated all of this." My breath hitched. The man he spoke of was untouchable, a ghost in the machine, a puppeteer pulling strings from the shadows. Alessandro was suggesting treason. But the thought of striking back, of dismantling the web of deceit that had ensnared me, was intoxicating. "And why would you help me?" I asked, suspicion lacing my tone. "What's in it for you?" His lips curved into a cold smile. "Let's just say our interests align. He has something I want back, something he stole." He stepped away, turning to face the rain-streaked city. "Think about it, Isabella. I'll give you the resources, the training, the protection you need. You'll become my weapon." A beautiful, deadly weapon pointed directly at his heart. The proposal. The hours that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions. Fear, betrayal, and a surprising surge of rebellious defiance warred within me. Could I trust him? Probably not. But could I afford not to? The alternative was to be a pawn, a victim swept away by the tides of their power struggle. I paced the length of the penthouse suite, the opulent surroundings feeling like a gilded cage. I imagined his target, the man behind the curtain, a faceless enemy who controlled my life from afar. The thought ignited a spark of cold fury within me. When Alessandro returned, the city was cloaked in pre-dawn darkness. He didn't speak, simply watched as I approached him, my decision etched on my face. "I'll do it," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "I'll help you destroy him." A predatory gleam lit his eyes. "Good. Then welcome to my world, Isabella, a world of shadows, secrets, and consequences." He reached for me, his touch no longer tentative but possessive. He pulled me against him, his lips finding mine in a kiss that was both a punishment and a promise. It was a kiss of power, of control, of shared danger. I tasted the darkness in him, the ruthlessness that ran beneath his polished surface, and found myself strangely drawn to it. This wasn't love, not even close. This was something far more dangerous, far more addictive. The deal. The next few weeks were a brutal apprenticeship. Alessandro was a demanding teacher, pushing me to my limits both physically and mentally. He taught me self-defense, weapons handling, surveillance techniques, skills I never imagined I would need. He drilled me on the intricacies of his organization, the complex network of alliances and betrayals that held it together. I learned to lie, to deceive, to manipulate, to become the weapon he wanted me to be. Our relationship was a dangerous dance, a constant push and pull of power and desire. We were allies, yes, but also adversaries, each wary of the other's true intentions. The nights were filled with a raw, consuming passion, a desperate attempt to find solace in the shared danger. But in the cold light of day, the secrets remained, the unspoken questions hanging heavy between us. One evening, as we stood overlooking the city, the first vestiges of autumn painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Alessandro handed me a file. "He's making a move," he said, his voice grim. "A big one. It's time for you to play your part." I opened the file, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside were details of a high-stakes poker game, a gathering of the city's elite, including our target. It was a chance to get close, to gather information, to perhaps even strike a blow. This was it. The moment of truth. I looked at Alessandro, my eyes narrowed. What do you want me to do? He smiled, a chillingly beautiful expression that sent a shiver down my spine. Win, he said. Win big. And make him notice you. The game. The casino throbbed with money and tension. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and desperation. I walked through the hall, my dress a shimmering crimson, my movements fluid and graceful. Alessandro's training had transformed me. I was no longer the naive woman he had first met. I was something else entirely, something stronger, something colder, something far more dangerous. I took my seat at the poker table, my gaze sweeping over the players. There he was, sitting across from me, his eyes like chips of ice. He was older than I expected, his face etched with the lines of power and ruthlessness. He didn't seem to recognize me, or if he did, he didn't show it. Good. That was part of the plan. The game began. I played with a cool precision, my calculations flawless, my bluffs undetectable. I won hand after hand, slowly but surely, chipping away at my opponent's stacks. The target watched me, his gaze now filled with a flicker of interest, then curiosity, then something akin to admiration. It was working. As the night wore on, the stakes grew higher. The tension in the room was palpable. It was down to just the two of us now, me and him. The final hand was dealt. I looked at my cards, my heart pounding in my chest, a royal flush, the perfect hand. I met his gaze, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I'll see your bet," I said, my voice a low purr, "and raise you everything." He hesitated, his eyes searching mine, trying to decipher my intentions. He knew I was bluffing, or at least he thought he did, but he couldn't be sure, and in that moment of uncertainty, I had him. He pushed his remaining chips into the pot. "I call," he said, his voice tight. I laid down my cards, the royal flush gleaming under the casino lights. A gasp rippled through the room. He stared at the cards, his face a mask of disbelief. He had lost. Everything. I had won. I stood up, my gaze fixed on him. "It seems," I said, my voice dripping with honeyed malice, "that the house always wins." As I turned to leave, I felt his hand grasp my arm. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. I turned back, my eyes locking with his. "Someone you underestimated," I whispered, and walked away, leaving him standing there, defeated and humiliated. The irreversible shift had happened. I was no longer a pawn, I was a player. As I left the casino, I felt a thrill course through me. I had played my part, and I had played it well, but I knew this was just the beginning. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. I glanced up at the rain-swept sky, a sense of foreboding settling over me. The storm was far from over. It was only just beginning, and the next chapter promised even greater danger. Next steps. With the gambit played and a crucial victory secured, Isabella has proven her worth and ruthlessness. But the enemy now knows she is a threat. Moving forward, Isabella must prepare for inevitable retaliation while continuing to decipher Alessandro's true motives. Can she trust him? And what will be the cost of her newfound power? The opulent ballroom shimmered, a gilded cage reflecting Anya's internal turmoil. Tonight was the night, the culmination of weeks spent navigating treacherous alliances, feigning smiles at venomous socialites, and battling her growing affection for Stefan Volkov. He stood across the room, a monolith of controlled power. His tailored suit, the color of midnight, only intensified the stark angles of his face, the piercing intensity of his eyes. He was speaking to Dmitri, his second in command, but Anya felt the weight of his gaze, a silent promise of the storm to come. She had played her part perfectly. The innocent debutante, captivated by Volkov's dark allure. She had fed him information, subtly manipulated events, all to bring him to this precise moment. Tonight, she would expose him. Tonight, she would dismantle his empire. But the closer she got, the more she doubted the necessity of her mission. The dance of deception. The music swelled, a seductive waltz that seemed to echo the dangerous dance she and Stefan were engaged in. He moved with a predator's grace, his hand finding the small of her back with a possessive familiarity that sent shivers down her spine. "You look exquisite, Anya," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Almost too good to be true. She forced a laugh, a brittle sound that betrayed her nervousness. "Is that a compliment, Stefan, or an accusation?" "Perhaps both." His grip tightened, drawing her closer. The subtle pressure sent a jolt of defiance and a confusing thrill through her body. Tell me, Anya, what secrets do you hide behind those innocent eyes? Secrets are the currency of this world, Stefan. You should know that better than anyone. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through her. True, but some secrets are more dangerous than others, and I suspect yours could burn us both to the ground. The unveiling. This was it, the signal. Across the room, her contact, a nervous little man named Boris, gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The documents were in place. The authorities were ready to move. Stefan Volkov's empire was about to crumble. It's time, Stefan, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the music. Time for the truth to be revealed. He stopped dancing, his eyes narrowing. He knew. She had betrayed him. Anya steeled herself, prepared for his rage, his vengeance. But instead, a flicker of pain crossed his face. I expected this, he said, his voice strangely devoid of emotion. I knew you were playing me, Anya, from the very beginning. Then why? She asked, confusion lacing her voice. Why let me get this far? He smiled, a sad, knowing smile that twisted her heart. Because I wanted to see how far you were willing to go. I wanted to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, there was something real between us. Anya felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She had been so focused on her mission, on taking down Volkov, that she hadn't considered the possibility that she had hurt him. And that hurting him hurt her. The doors to the ballroom burst open. Armed guards flooded the room, their weapons trained on Stefan. Dmitri barked orders, his face a mask of fury. Panic erupted as guests screamed and scrambled for cover. Stefan didn't flinch. He simply watched Anya, his eyes filled with an unreadable emotion. Everything she had worked for was finally happening. Volkov's criminal enterprise was about to be exposed. Justice would be served. But as she watched him, standing there, seemingly resigned to his fate, Anya realized something terrifying. She didn't want this. She didn't want to see him destroyed. The victory she had craved felt hollow, tainted by the undeniable truth that she had fallen in love with the very man she was sworn to betray. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about him, the choice. Stop! Anya cried, her voice cutting through the chaos. All eyes turned to her, including Stefan's, widened in surprise. This was not part of the plan. This was a deviation. Anya, what are you doing? Boris shouted, his face contorted with anger. He's a criminal. He needs to be brought to justice. I know what he is. Anya retorted, her voice trembling but firm. But I also know that he's not the monster you think he is. She took a step towards Stefan, ignoring the guards who were now pointing their weapons at her. Stefan, she said, her voice soft, pleading. Tell them the truth. He hesitated, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a sigh, a sound of resignation. It's over, Anya. There's no point. There's always a point, she insisted, tears streaming down her face. Tell them about the orphanage you fund. Tell them about the people you've helped. Tell them about us. Stefan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and something else. Something that made her heart soar with hope. Us, he echoed, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, us, she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. I love you, Stefan, and I know, deep down, that you love me too. The room fell silent. The guards lowered their weapons, their faces etched with confusion. Even Dmitri looked stunned. Then Stefan did the unthinkable. He smiled, a genuine, heart-stopping smile that transformed his face. Checkmate, Anya, he said, his voice filled with a newfound warmth. You win. Before anyone could react, Stefan grabbed Anya's hand and pulled her towards a hidden passage behind the ballroom stage. The guards hesitated, unsure of what to do. Dmitri, however, seemed to understand. He gave a curt nod, signaling them to stand down. As they disappeared into the darkness, Anya knew that she had just made the most dangerous decision of her life. She had chosen love over duty, passion over pragmatism. She had betrayed her mission, her organization, everything she had ever believed in. But as she looked at Stefan, his eyes shining with a fierce possessiveness, she knew, with absolute certainty, that she had made the right choice. Their problems were far from over. They were now fugitives, hunted by both the authorities and Stefan's enemies. But they had each other. And that, she realized, was all that mattered. Next steps. Anya and Stefan's world has been irrevocably altered. They are now on the run, their love a dangerous flame in a world of shadows. What awaits them in the darkness? Will they find a way to clear Stefan's name, or will they forever be hunted? The stakes have been raised, and the game has only just begun. The air in the penthouse suite crackled with unspoken energy. Rain lashed against the panoramic windows, mirroring the tempest brewing inside me. Dmitri stood across the room, a silhouette against the storm-lit city. His usual controlled mask had fractured, revealing a raw intensity that both terrified and electrified me. We had been dancing around the truth for weeks, a dangerous pas de deux of attraction and suspicion. Now the music had stopped. "So," I began, my voice barely a whisper above the storm, "you knew about my assignment." Dmitri turned, his dark eyes pinning me. "I suspected, from the beginning." My breath hitched. He knew? All this time, the vulnerability I'd shown, the trust I'd offered, it was all under his calculating gaze. Betrayal, cold and sharp, pierced through the fragile hope I'd been nurturing. "And you didn't say anything?" My voice rose, laced with incredulity. "You let me make a fool of myself?" Dmitri took a step closer, the predatory grace of a panther. "Fool? Never, Anya. You are anything but a fool, but I needed to be certain, to understand the scope of their ambition. Your ambition." "My ambition?" I echoed, the words tasting like ash. "I was trying to protect my family, to get my sister out from under their thumb. You think I wanted to spy on you?" He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "And what will protecting your family cost? How far are you willing to go to obtain the means to purchase their freedom? I already know they have leverage over you. What I don't know is what you will do with that freedom when you have it." The rain intensified, drumming a frantic rhythm against the glass. He's seen all the moves on the board and is asking me what I intend to do next. The revelation. My hands clenched into fists. "You have no idea what they're capable of." I spat. "They control everything. The police, the courts, even people in this city. I had no choice." Dmitri's eyes narrowed. "Everyone has a choice, Anya. Some are just more difficult than others." He paused, his gaze hardening. "I am willing to take that choice from you. I will protect you and your sister from them. You need only say the word. But understand, this protection is not free. I will demand a price. Are you willing to pay it?" The underlying threat was palpable. He wasn't just offering safety, he was offering a cage, albeit a gilded one. Surrender to him, and I'd be trading one master for another. But was it a price worth paying? I weighed the options, the scales tipping precariously between freedom and safety, between the devil I knew and the one standing before me. "What kind of price?" I asked, my voice barely audible. A slow, dangerous smile curved his lips. "A price that suits me and ensures your continued cooperation." He was playing a dangerous game, and I was fast running out of options. My perspective, caught between forces. Dmitri's intensity is alluring but dangerous. My family's safety is paramount. What is the price? Dmitri's motivation, power and control, using my vulnerability, protecting his interests, or genuine affection, seeks information about my next move. The ultimatum. I lifted my chin, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "I'm not some pawn you can manipulate, Dmitri. I have my own assets." It was a bluff, and we both knew it. His smile widened, a flash of white in the dim light. "Assets? I'm aware of your talents, Anya. They are considerable. But against my resources, against my reach, they are insignificant. I am offering you a way out, a chance to rewrite your story. But the clock is ticking." He closed the distance between us, his presence overwhelming. The scent of rain and expensive cologne filled my senses, a potent and intoxicating mix. "Tell me," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through my bones. "What is it they want from me? What information are you tasked with gathering? Tell me the truth, Anya, and perhaps I will consider a reduced rate." I hesitated. Revealing the truth would solidify my betrayal of those who had once controlled me. But clinging to their agenda would bind me to a future I no longer desired. Dmitri watched, his eyes like chips of obsidian, waiting for my decision. I had reached a precipice. The next step would determine everything. I took a breath. "They want to know about Project Nightingale." Dmitri's expression didn't change, but the air pressure around him seemed to shift. "Nightingale," he repeated softly, as if tasting the word. "And what precisely is Project Nightingale?" "I don't know all the details," I confessed, "only that it is your most sensitive project, something related to biological weaponry, something that if it were to get out would have global repercussions." A muscle ticked in his jaw. Someone is playing a dangerous game indeed. Tell me who gave you this information." I hesitated again. "I can't," I whispered. Dmitri stepped back, his expression hardening. "Then you are of no use to me." He turned away, walking towards the window again. "I will give you one last chance to tell me who wants Project Nightingale. After that, I can promise your life will be hell. Do not forget who holds all the cards here. I am your only escape, and I hold the ultimate power. Do not cross me again." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. But as he turned away, I realized something new. In that moment of intense emotion, the cold mask had slipped again. And what was revealed wasn't anger or even calculated coldness, it was fear. Dmitri was afraid of what Project Nightingale might unleash. And in that fear, I sensed a new vulnerability, a new point of leverage. The game wasn't over. It had just changed. The shift, the rain began to subside, a fragile dawn painting the sky with streaks of gray and pink. The storm within me, however, raged on. I'd walked into this room a pawn, but I refused to leave as one. Dmitri might think he had me cornered, but he had underestimated me. He had opened his hand just enough for me to get a glimpse. He's shown me that beneath his power, there is something worth fighting for. And if he won't admit it, I will. I now know enough about him to push back. "Checkmate, Dmitri," I said, my voice stronger now, infused with a newfound resolve. "It appears we both have something the other wants. I will use his desperation against him, and I will protect those I love. Next steps. Anya's next move is crucial. She must leverage her knowledge of Project Nightingale and Dmitri's fear to gain a position of power. But who can she trust? And what is Dmitri willing to sacrifice to keep his secret safe?" The city was a blur of glass and rain, its skyline fractured by lightning that illuminated the world for a heartbeat before plunging it back into shadow. Elara stood at the window of her penthouse, her reflection ghosted against the storm. The silence inside was suffocating, too heavy, too deliberate. It was the kind of silence that followed betrayal, the kind that demanded to be broken but never was. Cassian hadn't called, not once, not since the gala, not since the truth had detonated between them like a fault line splitting open. She had told herself she didn't care, that she was done with him, that she could rebuild without him. But every night, when the city quieted and the world shrank to the sound of her own heartbeat, she felt the absence of his voice like a wound that refused to close. Her phone buzzed. A single message. "We need to talk." She stared at it for a long time, her pulse quickening despite herself. The rational part of her screamed to delete it, to let him drown in the consequences of his lies. But the part of her that still remembered the warmth of his hand on her skin, the way his voice softened when he said her name, that part refused to let go. She typed one word. "Where?" The reply came instantly. "Vance Tower, midnight." The irony wasn't lost on her. The building that bore her name, the empire she had built from the ashes of her father's downfall, would now host the man responsible for that ruin. By the time she arrived, the storm had broken. The lobby was empty, the air thick with the scent of rain and marble polish. She took the private elevator to the top floor, her reflection flickering in the mirrored walls. Each floor that passed felt like a descent into something inevitable. When the doors opened, Cassian was waiting. He stood by the window, his silhouette outlined by the city lights. He looked different. Tired, unguarded, stripped of the arrogance that had once defined him. "Elara," he said, his voice low, careful. She crossed her arms. "You have 5 minutes." He turned, meeting her gaze. "I didn't come to defend myself. I came to tell you the truth." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Now you care about the truth?" "I always did," he said. "I just didn't trust you with it." Her eyes narrowed. "You mean you didn't trust me not to destroy you?" He didn't deny it. "Maybe, but I was wrong." The silence stretched between them, thick and electric. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline. "Elara, I didn't cause your father's downfall," he said finally. "But I didn't stop it either. My company profited from it. I told myself it was just business, that it wasn't personal. But then I met you, and it became the most personal thing in my life." Her throat tightened. "You think that makes it better?" "No," he said quietly. "It makes it worse." She turned away, her hands trembling. "You had every chance to tell me, every chance to be honest." "I know," he said, "and I didn't because I was afraid that if you knew what I'd done, you'd never look at me the same way again." She faced him then, her eyes bright with anger and something else, something dangerously close to heartbreak. You were right. He took a step closer. Elara, she said, her voice breaking. You don't get to say my name like that anymore. He stopped, the distance between them charged with everything unsaid. Then tell me what to do, he said. Tell me how to fix this. You can't, she whispered. That's the point. The words hung in the air, final and devastating. Cassian exhaled, his composure fracturing. I'll walk away if that's what you want, but before I do, you should know I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness. I came here to give you back what I took. Now, he reached into his coat and placed a small folder on the table. Inside were documents, contracts, financial records, proof that he had dismantled the network that had profited from her father's ruin. It's yours, he said. Everything I built from that deal. Every cent, every asset. I don't want it. Elara stared at the folder, her heart pounding. Why? Because it was never mine to keep, he said, and because I can't live with what it cost. For a long moment, neither moved. The rain softened against the glass, the storm easing into silence. Elara stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. You think this changes anything? No, he said, but maybe it's a start. She looked at him then, not as the man who had betrayed her, but as the man who was finally trying to make it right. And for the first time she saw the weight he carried, the guilt, the regret, the love he couldn't undo. The silence between them shifted, no longer empty but full of possibility. Cassian, she said softly, you can't fix the past. I know, he said, but maybe we can build something from what's left. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the folder, her fingers brushing his. The contact was brief, electric, and enough to remind them both that the story wasn't over. Outside, the storm broke into dawn. The city glowed gold against the horizon, fragile and new. Elara turned back to the window, her reflection merging with his. The silence remained, but it no longer felt like an ending. It felt like the pause before something begins. Chapter 9. The Edge of Surrender. The morning light crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows, soft and golden, painting the room in quiet contradiction. The world outside was waking, but inside, Elara's world had never felt more still. The folder Cassian had left behind sat open on the table, its contents spilling like confessions across the glass. Every page was a piece of him. His empire, his guilt, his surrender. She had read them all through the night. Each document was a revelation, each signature a scar. He had dismantled everything he'd built, stripped himself of the power that once defined him. For her. For redemption. For something that might never be returned. The silence pressed in, thick and unrelenting. It wasn't peace, it was the weight of everything unsaid. When the knock came, it was soft, almost hesitant. Elara didn't move. She knew who it was. She had known he would come. Cassian never left things unfinished. The door opened, and there he was, standing in the threshold, rain still clinging to his coat, his eyes shadowed but steady. He looked different. Not the man who commanded boardrooms and headlines, but someone stripped bare, uncertain, human. You shouldn't be here, she said, her voice quiet but sharp. I know, he replied, but I couldn't leave it like that. Elara turned away, her gaze fixed on the skyline. You already did. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The sound echoed like a decision. You think I came here to ask for forgiveness again? I think you came here because you don't know how to let go. Cassian's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. You're right, I don't. Not when it comes to you. The words hit harder than she wanted them to. She hated that part of her still responded to his voice, to the quiet gravity of it. She hated that even now, after everything, her pulse betrayed her. Cassian, she said, forcing control into her tone, you can't keep showing up and expecting me to forget what you did. I don't want you to forget, he said. I just want you to see that I'm not the same man who did it. She turned then, meeting his gaze. You think giving up your company changes that? You think walking away from your empire makes you clean? No, he said softly, but it's a start. He moved closer, slow and deliberate, until the air between them felt charged. I built everything I had on control, he said, on power, on never needing anyone, and then you came along and ruined all of it. Elara's breath caught. You call that love? I call it truth, he said. You made me see what I was, and I hated it, but I couldn't walk away. She wanted to tell him to stop, to leave, to take his confessions and his guilt and disappear. But the words wouldn't come, because beneath the anger, beneath the betrayal, there was still something else, something raw and unbroken. "Why now?" she asked. "Why give it all up?" "Because I realized power means nothing if I have to live without you," he said, "and because I'm tired of fighting battles that don't matter." The silence that followed was unbearable. The city hummed below them, the world moving on as if their lives weren't unraveling in slow motion. Elara turned back to the window, her reflection merging with his in the glass. "You think this is enough to make me trust you again?" "No," he said, "but I'm willing to spend the rest of my life proving it." She closed her eyes. "You don't get to say things like that." "Then tell me what I can say," he whispered. "Tell me what I can do." Her voice trembled. "You can stop making me want to believe you." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers, but not touching. "I can't." The air between them shifted. Just the tension that had once been born of anger now pulsed with something deeper, something dangerous. Elara turned, her eyes meeting his. "If I let you in again, there's no going back." "I know," he said, "and I'm not asking for forever. Just a chance." She studied him, searching for the lie. But there wasn't one. The man standing before her wasn't the ruthless strategist who had once broken her world apart. He was the man who had chosen to burn his own to make things right. Finally, she stepped forward, just one step, enough to close the distance, enough to feel the warmth of him. Cassian's breath hitched. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch tentative, reverent. "This doesn't fix anything," she said. "No," he murmured, "but it's a start." When his lips met hers, it wasn't the desperate collision of two people trying to forget. It was the quiet surrender of two souls who had finally stopped running. The kiss was slow, deliberate, filled with everything they couldn't say. When they parted, the world felt different, lighter, dangerous, alive. Elara stepped back, her pulse racing. If we do this," she said, "we do it on my terms." Cassian nodded. "Then tell me the rules." She smiled faintly, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "There are no rules anymore." He laughed softly, the sound low and rough. "That's what scares me." "Good," she said, "it should." Outside, the city stirred to life, unaware that somewhere high above, two people had just rewritten the balance of power, not with contracts or threats, but with a single, irrevocable choice. Elara turned back to the window, the first light of morning spilling across her face. Cassian stood behind her, silent, waiting. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was losing control. She felt like she was finally taking it back. And as the sun rose over the city, gilding the skyline in gold, she realized something she hadn't dared to before. This wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of a new one, written not in power or revenge, but in the fragile, dangerous language of surrender. The city glowed beneath a veil of mist, its lights flickering like embers in the distance. From the balcony of her penthouse, Elara watched the world she had built. Every deal, every victory, every scar stretch out before her. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like a cage. Behind her, the faint sound of footsteps broke the silence. Cassian. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. His presence filled the room before he spoke, a quiet gravity that pulled at her even when she wanted to resist. "You didn't sleep," he said softly. "Neither did you," she replied, her voice steady but distant. He came closer, stopping just behind her. "You always notice." Elara's reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, composed, untouchable, but hollow. "You make it hard not to." Cassian's gaze lingered on her reflection. "You're thinking about what comes next." "I'm thinking about what I've already lost," she said. He stepped beside her, the city lights catching the edge of his jaw. "You haven't lost me." She turned then, meeting his eyes. "Haven't I? You burned everything down, Cassian. You gave up your company, your power, your name. You think that makes you free, but it doesn't. It just means you have nothing left to hide behind." He didn't flinch. "Maybe that's the point." Elara's breath caught. "You think this, us, is enough to rebuild from?" "I don't know," he said. "But I know I can't rebuild without you." The words hit her harder than she expected. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that love could exist without strategy, without betrayal. But belief had always been her weakness. "Cassian," she said quietly, "you don't get to rewrite the past." "I'm not trying to," he said. "I'm trying to write something new." He reached out, his hand brushing her arm. The touch was light, tentative, but it sent a shiver through her. She hated that he could still do that, undo her with a single gesture. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "I know," he said. "That's why it feels real." The air between them thickened, charged with something that had been building for too long. Elara turned away, but Cassian caught her wrist, his grip firm but gentle. "Tell me to stop," he said. She didn't. Instead, she stepped closer, her pulse quickening. "If we do this," she said, "everything changes. Everything already has." He murmured. The words broke something inside her. The restraint she'd clung to for years slipped away, replaced by something raw and undeniable. She reached for him, her fingers curling into his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss was fire, hungry, desperate, and years in the making. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't redemption, it was surrender. Cassian's hands framed her face, his touch reverent and rough all at once. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling, their breaths uneven. "This doesn't fix us," she said, her voice unsteady. "I don't want to fix us," he said. "I just want to stop pretending we're broken." Elara laughed softly, the sound caught between disbelief and surrender. "You always know what to say." "No," he said. "I just finally stopped lying." She looked at him then, the man who had once been her rival, her undoing, her greatest mistake. And now, somehow, the only person who made her feel alive. "Stay," she said. The word slipped out before she could stop it. Cassian froze, his eyes searching hers. "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted, "but I want to be." He stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "Then I'll stay until you are." The hours that followed blurred into something timeless. They talked, they argued, they laughed, two people relearning how to exist in the same space without armor. The city outside faded into silence, the storm long gone, replaced by the quiet rhythm of something new. When dawn came, Elara lay awake beside him, watching the first light spill across the room. Cassian slept, his hand resting against hers, his breathing steady. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. But beneath the calm, a flicker of unease stirred. The world they had built their lives in, the world of power, secrets, and consequences, would not stay silent for long. She slipped out of bed, wrapping herself in a silk robe, and walked to the window. The city stretched before her, vast and indifferent. Somewhere out there, the board members of Vance Industries were already plotting their next move. The press would soon learn that Cassian Holt had resigned, that his empire had crumbled overnight. And when they did, they would come for her. Cassian stirred behind her. "You're thinking again," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "I never stopped," she said. He sat up, the sheet falling around his waist. "You don't have to fight this alone anymore." Elara turned, her expression soft but resolute. "I've never had that luxury." He rose, crossing the room to stand behind her. His hands rested lightly on her shoulders. "Then let me change that." She looked at their reflection in the glass, two figures standing on the edge of something fragile and fierce. "You can't change what I am," she said. "I don't want to," he replied. "I just want to stand beside it." For a long moment, neither spoke. The city hummed below, the world waiting for their next move. Finally, Elara turned to face him. "If we do this, Cassian, we do it my way. No secrets, no power plays, no lies." He nodded. "Then tell me where to start." She smiled faintly. "With the truth." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Then here it is," he said. "I love you, and I'm not walking away again." The words hung in the air, fragile and absolute. Alara's heart ached with the weight of them. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that love could survive the wreckage they'd made. And for the first time, she allowed herself to try. Outside, the sun rose higher, gilding the skyline in gold. The city was waking, and with it so were they. Two souls bound by fire, standing on the edge of surrender, ready to face whatever came next. The morning after felt like a fragile truce. The city was alive again. Horns, voices, the hum of ambition. But inside Elara's penthouse, the world was still. Cassian stood by the window, shirt half-buttoned, watching the skyline as if it might offer him absolution. Elara moved quietly behind him, her robe trailing across the marble floor. The air between them was different now, softer, but edged with something unspoken. The night before had changed everything, but it hadn't erased the past. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. Cassian turned, his expression unreadable. "I have to. the board's meeting today. They'll want answers. They'll want blood, she corrected. He gave a faint, humorless smile. Then I'll give them mine. Elara crossed her arms. You think martyrdom will fix this? I think it's the only way to protect you, he said. Her eyes flashed. I don't need protection, Cassian. I need partnership. He stepped closer, his voice low. You have it, but if I don't face them, they'll come for you next. You know how this world works. She did. Too well. The vultures in tailored suits, the whispers in boardrooms, the headlines that could destroy a reputation in a single morning. She had fought them all before. But this time, she wasn't sure she could fight them and keep him. Let me come with you, she said. He shook his head. If you walk into that room, they'll see it as weakness. They'll use it against you. Then let them, she said fiercely. I'm done hiding behind strategy. Cassian's jaw tightened. Elara, no, she interrupted. You don't get to decide how I fight my battles. Not anymore. For a moment, neither spoke. The tension between them was sharp, but beneath it was something deeper. Respect, defiance, love. Finally, Cassian exhaled. You really don't make anything easy, do you? Would you love me if I did? She asked. He smiled then, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. No, I wouldn't. They left together. The boardroom at Vance Tower was a cathedral of glass and steel designed to intimidate. 12 men and women sat around the long table, their expressions carved from stone. At the head sat Victor Hale, interim chairman and Cassian's oldest rival. Mr. Holt, Hale said, his tone smooth as oil, you've caused quite a stir. Cassian didn't flinch. I imagine that's why you called this meeting. Hale's gaze flicked to Elara. And Ms. Vance, I didn't expect you to join us. Elara smiled coolly. I'm full of surprises. A murmur rippled through the room. Hale leaned back, steepling his fingers. You've both made bold moves. Cassian resigns. Elara consolidates. The press is calling it a coup. Call it what you like, Elara said. It's evolution. Hale's smile didn't reach his eyes. Evolution requires sacrifice. Are you prepared for that? Cassian placed a folder on the table. Already made mine. Inside were the final documents, proof of his divestment, his confession, his cooperation with the investigation into the corruption that had fueled his empire. The room fell silent. You're admitting guilt? Hale asked, incredulous. I'm admitting responsibility, Cassian said. There's a difference. Elara watched him, pride and fear warring inside her. He was dismantling himself piece by piece, and she couldn't stop him. Hale turned to her. And you, Miss Vance, what do you gain from this? Elara met his gaze without blinking. A clean slate, for both of us. The room erupted in whispers. Hale's expression hardened. You're aligning yourself with a man who just confessed to corporate crimes. That's not a clean slate, it's suicide. Elara leaned forward, her voice calm but lethal. No, Mr. Hale. It's strategy. Cassian Holt built an empire on power. I'll rebuild it on truth. And when the dust settles, the world will remember who stood for something real. The silence that followed was absolute. Hale's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. Maybe, she said, but it's mine to make. When they left the building, the press was waiting. Cameras flashed, questions flew, but Elara didn't flinch. Cassian reached for her hand, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. Later, in the quiet of the car, he turned to her. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, she said. You gave up everything for me. It's time I gave something back. He looked at her for a long moment, then reached over, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. You realize this means we're in this together now. Elara smiled faintly. That was always the point. The city blurred past the window, a mosaic of light and motion. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. Cassian leaned back, his hand still in hers. Whatever comes next, he said, we face it together. Elara turned to him, her eyes steady. Together, she echoed. Outside, the skyline burned gold in the setting sun. The cost of truth had been high, but for the first time, it felt worth paying. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the scars and the fire, love began to feel like victory. The city stretched endlessly beneath the morning haze, a living monument to ambition and consequence. From the balcony of her penthouse, Elara watched the skyline shimmer in the pale light, the glass towers catching the sun like blades. The world had changed since that day in the boardroom. So had she. The headlines had been merciless at first, the fall of Cassian Holt, the rise of Elara Vance, the scandal that shook the empire. But time had a way of softening even the sharpest stories. Within weeks, the narrative shifted. The press began to call it the Reformation of Vance Industries, a story of redemption, of leadership reborn. Elara had rebuilt the company from the ashes, not as a fortress of power, but as a foundation of integrity. The old guard had been replaced, the corrupt contracts dissolved, the culture rewritten. Investors returned, cautiously at first, then with conviction. The empire was alive again, but this time it was hers. Behind her, the sound of footsteps broke the quiet. Cassian. He had been gone for 3 days, testifying before the regulatory board, facing the final reckoning for his past. She hadn't asked what he would say. She hadn't needed to. When she turned, he was standing in the doorway, the morning light cutting across his face. He looked tired, but there was something different in his eyes. Peace. "It's done," he said simply. Elara's breath caught. And they accepted the deal. No charges, just sanctions, restitution, and a lifetime ban from corporate leadership. She crossed the room slowly, her heart pounding. "So it's over," he nodded. "It's over." For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, but not with fear, only relief. Elara reached up, brushing her fingers against his jaw. "You did it." He caught her hand, pressing it to his lips. "We did it." She smiled faintly. "You always say that, because it's true." They stood there, the city humming quietly beyond the glass, the weight of years lifting from their shoulders. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. Cassian's gaze held hers. "Every empire I built was hollow. Every victory was noise. But this," he gestured between them, "this is the only thing that ever felt real." Elara's throat tightened. "You lost everything." He smiled. "No, I found something better." She leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest. "You sound like a man who's finally free." "I am," he said, "because I stopped fighting the wrong battles." They stayed like that for a while, the quiet stretching between them like a promise. Later, they walked through the office together. The staff greeted Elara with respect, admiration, even warmth. Cassian kept a step behind her, content to let her lead. The woman who had once been underestimated now commanded the room with quiet authority. In the conference hall, a new plaque gleamed on the wall. Vance Industries, integrity, innovation, truth. Cassian traced the words with his fingers. "You changed everything." Elara smiled. "We changed everything." He turned to her. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, "we build something that lasts." He raised an eyebrow. "A company? A life?" Cassian laughed softly. "You always did think bigger than me." "That's why you followed me," she teased. "That's why I'll never stop." They left the building hand in hand, stepping into the sunlight. The city was alive around them, horns, voices, the pulse of 1,000 stories unfolding at once. For the first time, Elara didn't feel like she was fighting against it. She was part of it. That evening, they drove to the coast. The ocean stretched out before them, endless and wild. The wind tangled her hair, and Cassian stood beside her, his arm around her waist. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we'd never met?" he asked. Elara smiled. "I'd still be chasing perfection. You'd still be running from yourself." He nodded. "And now?" "Now we're exactly where we're supposed to be." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Cassian turned to her, his expression soft. "You know, I used to think love was weakness. And now? Now I know it's the only thing that ever made me strong." Elara's heart swelled. "You finally learned my language," he smiled. "You were a good teacher." They kissed then, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that didn't need to prove anything. It was a seal, a vow, a quiet acknowledgement of everything they had survived. When they pulled apart, the stars had begun to appear, faint and distant. Cassian looked out at the horizon. "So this is it, the end of the story." Elara shook her head. "No, this is the beginning of the one we write together." He smiled, pulling her close. "Then let's make it a good one." She rested her head against his shoulder, the sound of the waves filling the silence. For the first time in years, she felt at peace, not because she had won, but because she had chosen. The city lights flickered behind them, the ocean stretched before them, and between the two, between power and peace, ambition and love, they had found balance. Elara closed her eyes, breathing in the salt air. "We made it," she whispered. Cassian kissed her hair. "No," he said softly, "we became it." The wind carried their laughter out to sea, and as the night settled around them, the world felt new again, reborn in the light they had chosen. And somewhere deep within that light, their story continued, not as rivals, not as survivors, but as equals. Together, always. The ocean had become their sanctuary. For nearly a month, Elara and Cassian had lived in the rhythm of the coast. Mornings spent walking barefoot along the cliffs, afternoons filled with the hum of the sea, and nights where the only sound was the wind pressing against the windows. The world beyond their retreat had faded into something distant, almost unreal. But peace, Elara knew, was never permanent. The morning began with the sound of her phone vibrating against the nightstand. She almost ignored it. The world could wait. But when she saw the name flashing across the screen, her pulse quickened. Victor Hale. Cassian was still asleep, his breathing steady, one arm draped across the sheets. She slipped out of bed, pulling on a robe, and stepped onto the balcony. The air was cool, the horizon painted in soft gold. "Elara Vance," she said, her voice calm. "Still answering your own calls." Hale's voice drawled, smooth and venomous. "I admire that. What do you want?" "Just a conversation." "You've been quiet, too quiet. The market doesn't like silence." Alara's grip tightened on the railing. "The market will adjust. Perhaps, but investors are nervous. They're asking questions about your new ethics initiative, about the contracts you've canceled, about the people you've replaced." "Then tell them the truth," she said. "We're cleaning house." Hale chuckled. "You always did like to sound righteous, but you and I both know the world doesn't reward purity, it rewards control." "I'm not interested in control anymore." "Then you're already losing it." The line went dead. Elara stood there for a long moment, the wind tugging at her hair, the sea roaring below. She had expected resistance, but not from him, not so soon. Hale had been quiet since the boardroom confrontation, too quiet. When she turned, Cassian was awake, leaning against the doorway. "Hale?" She nodded. "What did he say?" "That he's not finished." Cassian's jaw tightened. "He's bluffing." "Maybe," she said, "but he's dangerous when cornered." He crossed the room, taking her hand. "Then we corner him first." Elara looked up at him, the fire in his eyes both comforting and terrifying. "You're not supposed to be part of this anymore." "I'm not," he said, "but I'm not letting him come after you." She wanted to argue, but she didn't. The truth was, she needed him, not as a shield, but as a partner. That afternoon, they returned to the city. The drive was long and silent, the skyline growing sharper with every mile. The moment they stepped into the Vance Tower lobby, the calm of the coast vanished. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, questions flying. "Elara, is it true you're restructuring the board?" "Cassian, are you advising her again?" "Are the rumors about Victor Hale's resignation real?" Elara kept walking, her expression unreadable. Cassian stayed close, his presence steady beside her. Inside her office, the air was thick with tension. Her assistant, Mara, handed her a folder. "You need to see this." Inside were leaked documents, emails, contracts, financial transfers, all signed by Hale, all dated after his supposed resignation. "He's been moving assets," Elara said quietly. Cassian scanned the pages. "He's setting up a shadow company, using your suppliers, your patents." "He's trying to rebuild what we destroyed," she said. Cassian looked up. "Then we stop him." Elara met his gaze. "No, we expose him." That night, they worked side by side, piecing together the evidence. The office lights burned long after midnight, the city outside a blur of motion. For the first time since their reconciliation, they were back in their element, not as lovers, but as strategists. Cassian leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "You realize what this means. If we go public, it'll start another war." Alara's eyes were cold and clear. "Then let it." He studied her for a moment. "You've changed." "No," she said. "I've remembered who I am." By dawn, they had everything they needed, proof of Hale's fraud, his offshore accounts, his network of shell companies, enough to destroy him completely. Cassian closed the final file. "We send it to the press?" Elara shook her head. "Not yet. We give him a chance to face me first." Cassian frowned. "You want to meet him?" "I want him to see what he created," she said, "and what he lost." The next day, she called Hale's office. He answered on the first ring. "Elara," he said smoothly, "I was just thinking of you." "I'm sure you were," she replied. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About the company you're building behind my back." There was a pause. Then, softly, "You've been busy. Meet me tomorrow, noon, my office." He laughed. "You think you can intimidate me?" "No," she said. "I think I can end you." When the call ended, Cassian was watching her from across the room. "You're sure about this?" "Yes," she said. "It's time to finish what we started." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll be there." Elara turned to the window, the city gleaming below. The peace they had built was fragile, and the past was rising again to test it. But this time, she wasn't afraid. This time, she wasn't fighting for survival. She was fighting for truth, and she wasn't fighting alone. The next morning, the city was wrapped in fog. The streets below the tower were slick with rain, the air heavy with anticipation. Elara arrived early, her reflection sharp in the glass walls of her office. She wore black, simple, precise, unyielding. Cassian entered a few minutes later, his expression unreadable. "He'll come," he said. "He always does," she replied. At exactly noon, the elevator doors opened. Victor Hale stepped out, immaculate as ever, his smile thin and practiced. "Elara," he said, spreading his hands, "you look radiant. Success suits you." She didn't return the smile. "You've been busy." He shrugged. "A man has to stay occupied. Retirement doesn't suit me. Neither does theft." Hale's eyes flicked to Cassian. "And you brought your shadow. How poetic." Cassian didn't move. "Say what you came to say." Hale turned back to Elara. "You think you've won. You think your little crusade for ethics will save you. But the world doesn't care about virtue. It cares about profit. And when your investors realize that your moral compass costs them money, they'll turn on you." Elara stepped closer. "Maybe, but at least I'll be able to look them in the eye." Hale's smile faltered. "You've always been sentimental." "No," she said, "I've always been underestimated." She slid a folder across the table. "These are your accounts, your shell companies, your offshore transfers. You've been sloppy." Hale's expression hardened. "You wouldn't dare." "I already did," she said. "The press gets it in 1 hour, unless you sign this." She handed him another document, his formal resignation from all remaining corporate holdings and a statement admitting his misconduct. Hale stared at it, then at her. "You think this will make you untouchable?" "No," she said. "It'll make me free." For a long moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the city below. Then Hale picked up the pen. His hand trembled slightly as he signed. When he was done, he looked up at her. "You've become ruthless." Elara met his gaze. "No, I've become honest." He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked to the door. "Enjoy your victory, Elara. It won't last." When he was gone, Cassian exhaled slowly. "You did it." Elara looked down at the signed papers. "No," she said quietly. "We did." He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. "You know what this means, don't you?" She nodded. "It means we finally get to start over." Outside, the fog began to lift, sunlight breaking through the clouds. The city shimmered, alive and restless, but for the first time, Elara felt at peace. The past had come for her, and she had faced it head-on. Now, there was only the future, and the man standing beside her, ready to face it too. The city had never looked so alive. From the top floor of Vance Tower, the skyline shimmered in the late afternoon light, a mosaic of glass and ambition. Yet beneath the gleam, Elara could feel the tremor of something shifting, something that refused to stay buried. Victor Hale was gone, but his shadow lingered. The press had devoured the story of his downfall, and for a brief moment, Elara had been hailed as a visionary, the woman who rebuilt an empire on truth. But the headlines faded quickly, replaced by speculation, by whispers of instability, by the same hunger that had always driven the city forward. Cassian stood by the window, his reflection fractured in the glass. "They're circling again," he said quietly. Elara didn't look up from the reports spread across her desk. "Let them. They'll find nothing left to feed on." He turned, his expression unreadable. "You sound certain." "I have to be." He crossed the room, stopping beside her. "You've been working non-stop since Hale signed those papers. You haven't slept. You barely eat." She gave a faint smile. "You sound like my assistant." "I sound like someone who's watching you burn yourself out." Elara set down her pen, finally meeting his gaze. "You think I don't know what I'm doing?" "I think you're trying to outrun something," he said. "And I think you're forgetting that you don't have to anymore." The words hit harder than she expected. For a moment she couldn't speak. The truth was, he was right. The victory had come at a cost, one she hadn't yet allowed herself to feel. She rose from her chair and walked to the window. The city stretched endlessly below, a living thing that demanded everything and gave nothing back. "Do you ever wonder if it was worth it?" she asked softly. Cassian joined her. Every day, but then I look at you and I know it was. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. You lost everything because of me. He shook his head. No, I lost everything because I built it on lies. You just showed me the truth. Elara's throat tightened. And what if the truth isn't enough? Cassian smiled faintly. Then we make it enough. The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had fought too long to need words. A knock at the door broke the moment. Mara stepped in, her expression tense. Miss Vance, you need to see this. She handed Elara a tablet. On the screen was a news alert. Anonymous source leaks internal Vance documents. Ethics initiative under scrutiny. Elara's stomach dropped. What documents? Financials, meeting transcripts, some of your private correspondence. Cassian frowned. How bad is it? Mara hesitated. Bad enough. They're saying the initiative was a cover for a merger deal, that you used it to consolidate power. Elara's pulse quickened. That's absurd. Maybe, Mara said, but perception is reality. When she left, the room felt colder. Cassian watched Elara pace, her mind already racing through possibilities. It's Hale, she said finally. He must have planted something before he left. Cassian nodded. Then we find it. They spent the next hours combing through files, tracing digital trails, calling in favors from old allies. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Someone had orchestrated this leak with precision. By midnight, Elara sat back in her chair, exhaustion etched into her features. He's gone, Cassian, but his poison isn't. Cassian leaned against the desk. Then we detoxify it. The same way we did before, together. She looked up at him, her eyes tired but fierce. You really believe we can fix this? I believe in you, he said simply. Something in her broke then, not in weakness, but in release. She stood, crossing the space between them, and pressed her forehead against his chest. I don't know how to stop fighting, she whispered. He wrapped his arms around her. Then don't, just fight for something that matters. They stayed like that for a long time, the city lights flickering around them. Outside, the storm gathered again. Rumors, headlines, the endless churn of power. But inside, there was stillness. When Elara finally pulled back, her voice was steady. Tomorrow we go public. We tell the truth before anyone else can twist it. Cassian nodded. And after that, she smiled faintly, after that we rest. He laughed softly. Rest? Maybe I'll learn? The next morning, the press conference was packed. Cameras lined the walls, reporters murmuring like vultures waiting for a signal. Elara stood at the podium, the weight of the city pressing down on her. Cassian watched from the side, his presence a quiet anchor. Good morning, she began. There have been reports questioning the integrity of our ethics initiative. I'm here to tell you the truth. She paused, letting the silence stretch. Yes, we made mistakes. Yes, we changed the structure of this company. But we did it because the old way was broken. Because power without accountability destroys everything it touches. The room was silent. Every camera was fixed on her. I won't apologize for demanding better from myself, from my team, from this industry. If that makes me a threat, so be it. I'd rather be a threat than a lie. When she stepped back, the room erupted in questions. Cassian met her eyes across the chaos, and for the first time in days she smiled. Later, as they walked out into the sunlight, he said quietly, You just declared war again. She looked up at him, her expression calm. No, I declared peace. The world just doesn't know what that looks like yet. He laughed, shaking his head. You're impossible. And you're still here, she said. Always. They stood at the edge of the plaza, the city alive around them. The storm hadn't passed, it never would, but for the first time Elara didn't fear it. She had learned to stand in the fire without burning. Cassian reached for her hand. What now? She looked toward the horizon where the sun was breaking through the clouds. Now, she said softly, we build something that can't be destroyed. And as they walked forward together, the city roared back to life, not as an enemy, but as a witness to their beginning. The city never slept, but tonight it felt restless. The streets below Vance Tower pulsed with light and motion, 1,000 stories unfolding at once. From her office window, Elara watched the chaos with a strange calm. The press conference had ended hours ago, yet the world was still reacting, an avalanche of headlines, speculation, and divided opinions. Some called her brave, others called her reckless. Cassian called her right. He entered quietly, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "You're still here," he said. Elara smiled faintly. "So are you." He set 1 cup beside her. "You should go home. Sleep. You've done enough for one day." She shook her head. "It's not over. The board meets tomorrow. They'll want answers." "They'll get them," he said. "You've already given them the truth. That's more than anyone else ever has." Elara turned from the window. Truth doesn't always win. Cassian leaned against the desk, studying her. "No, but it endures." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city filled the silence between them. Elara finally sat, rubbing her temples. "Do you ever miss it?" "Miss what?" "The game, the power, the control." Cassian's expression softened. "Sometimes. But then I remember what it cost me." She looked up. "And what did it cost?" He smiled faintly. "Everything that mattered." Alara's chest tightened. "You make it sound simple." "It is," he said. "You just have to decide what matters more, winning or living." She leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I used to think they were the same thing." Cassian reached out, brushing his fingers against hers. They never were. The touch lingered, quiet and grounding. For all the chaos outside, this moment felt still, like the eye of a storm. Then Mara's voice broke through the intercom. "Ms. Vance, you need to see this." Elara straightened. "What is it?" "There's been a breach. Someone accessed the internal servers. We're locking it down, but—" The line cut off. Cassian was already moving. "Let's go." They raced down the corridor to the operations floor. Screens flickered with lines of code, alerts flashing red. Mara stood at the center, directing the tech team. "What happened?" Elara demanded. "Someone's inside the system," Mara said. "They're pulling files, financials, communications, everything tied to the ethics initiative." Cassian scanned the monitors. "Can you trace it?" "Trying. Whoever it is, they're good." Alara's pulse pounded. "Shut it down. Pull the main server offline." "We can't," Mara said. "They've locked us out of the command hub." Cassian's eyes narrowed. "Then we find another way." He moved to one of the terminals, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The room buzzed with tension, the hum of machines blending with the sound of rain against the windows. Minutes passed. Then Cassian froze. "I've got something." Elara leaned over his shoulder. On the screen, a single name appeared in the trace log, Victor Hale. Her stomach dropped. "He's supposed to be gone." Cassian's jaw tightened. "He's not. He's been waiting." Mara looked between them. "What do we do?" Alara's voice was steady. "We fight back." Cassian turned to her. "If we go after him, he'll know. He'll retaliate." "He already has," she said. "This is war." They worked through the night, tracing the breach, isolating the corrupted files, building a counterattack. The office lights burned long past midnight, casting sharp shadows across the glass walls. At one point, Cassian looked up from the screen. "He's not just stealing data. He's rewriting it. He's trying to make it look like you falsified the reports." Alara's breath caught. "He's framing me." Cassian nodded grimly. "If he succeeds, everything you've built collapses." She stared at the screen, her reflection fractured in the glass. "Then we don't let him." Hours blurred together. The storm outside grew louder, thunder rolling across the skyline. Inside, the tension was electric. Every keystroke felt like a heartbeat. Finally, just before dawn, Cassian leaned back. "Got him." Elara turned. "You traced him?" He nodded. "He's operating from an offshore relay, but I've locked his access. He can't touch the servers again." Relief washed through her, but it was short-lived. "He'll try something else." Cassian met her gaze. "Then we stay ready." The first light of morning spilled through the windows, pale and uncertain. The city below was waking again, unaware of the battle that had just been fought in silence. Elara stood by the window, watching the horizon. "He won't stop until he destroys me." Cassian joined her. "Then we make sure he can't." She turned to him, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't want to live like this, always waiting for the next attack." "Then don't," he said. "End it." She looked at him, understanding dawning. "You mean go after him?" Cassian nodded. "Find him, expose him, finish it for good." Alara's pulse quickened. "That means leaving the city." "Then we leave," he said simply. For a long moment she said nothing. The idea terrified her, and yet it felt inevitable. Finally she nodded. "We'll need a plan." Cassian smiled faintly. "We always do." As the sun rose over the skyline, painting the glass towers in gold, Elara felt something she hadn't in months. Clarity. The war wasn't over, but the fear was gone. She turned to Cassian, her voice steady. Let's finish what he started. He reached for her hand. Together? Always. Outside, the city roared to life again, unaware that its brightest minds were preparing for one final reckoning. And somewhere far beyond the skyline, Victor Hale was waiting. The jet cut through the clouds like a blade, its engines humming low against the endless stretch of sky. Elara sat by the window, her reflection ghosted against the glass, the world below reduced to a blur of silver and blue. Cassian sat across from her, a tablet in his hands, his expression focused but calm. They hadn't spoken much since takeoff. Words felt unnecessary now. Every decision, every risk, every sleepless night had led to this moment. Victor Hale had gone to ground in Geneva, hiding behind shell corporations and diplomatic loopholes. But Cassian had found him, traced his digital fingerprints through encrypted accounts and offshore proxies until there was nowhere left to run. Elara turned from the window. How long until we land? 2 hours, Cassian said. Mara confirmed the meeting. Hale's expecting a representative from the Zurich consortium. He doesn't know it's you. Elara nodded. Good. I want him off balance. Cassian studied her for a moment. You're sure about this? I've been sure since the day he called me. He leaned forward, his voice low. Then we do this clean. No threats, no chaos. We get what we need and we walk away. Elara's eyes hardened. If he gives me a reason, I won't walk away. Cassian didn't argue. He knew better than to try. The rest of the flight passed in silence. When they landed, the air was sharp and cold, the mountains rising like sentinels beyond the city. Geneva was beautiful in a way that felt almost cruel, too serene for the kind of confrontation waiting beneath its surface. Their car wound through narrow streets lined with glass towers and old stone facades. The meeting was set in a private suite overlooking the lake, a place Hale used for his consultations. Elara stepped out first, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Cassian followed, his presence steady behind her. Inside, the suite was immaculate, modern, sterile, expensive. Hale was already there, standing by the window with a glass of scotch in hand. He turned as they entered, his smile sharp. Elara Vance, he said. I was wondering when you'd come. She didn't return the smile. You've been busy. He gestured to the view. It's a good place to think, far from the noise. Far from accountability, she said. Hale's eyes flicked to Cassian. And you brought your shadow again. How touching. Cassian didn't move. We're not here for pleasantries. Hale chuckled. No, I suppose not. You've come to finish me off, haven't you? Elara stepped closer. You finished yourself. I'm just here to make it official. He raised an eyebrow. And how do you plan to do that? She placed a folder on the table. These are your accounts, the ones you thought were hidden, the shell companies, the transfers, the falsified audits, all of it. Hale's smile faltered. You don't scare me. I'm not trying to, she said. I'm giving you a choice. He laughed softly. A choice? Confess, she said, publicly. Admit what you did. Return what you stole. Walk away quietly and I'll make sure the authorities see your cooperation. And if I don't, Elara's voice was calm. Then I burn everything you've ever built. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the city outside. Hale studied her, his expression unreadable. Then he set down his glass. You've changed, he said. Once upon a time you would have begged for my approval. Once upon a time, I didn't know who I was, he smiled faintly. And now? Now I do. Hale walked to the table, his fingers brushing the folder. You think you've won, but you've built your empire on the same foundation as mine, ambition, pride, control. You'll fall just like I did. Elara met his gaze. Maybe, but I'll fall knowing I tried to do better. He opened the folder, scanning the documents. His jaw tightened. You really did your homework. Cassian stepped forward. Sign it, Hale. Hale looked up, his eyes cold. You think this ends with a signature? It ends when you stop pretending you're untouchable, Elara said. For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly he picked up the pen. The sound of it scratching across the paper was almost deafening. When he finished, he looked up at her. You've become ruthless. Elara's expression didn't change. No, I've become free. He set the pen down, his voice low. You'll regret this. Maybe, she said. But not today. Cassian took the folder, tucking it under his arm. We're done here. As they turned to leave, Hale called after them. You think you've saved yourself, Elara, but the world doesn't forgive women like you. It waits for them to bleed. Elara paused at the door, her hand on the frame, then let it wait. Outside, the air was crisp, the lake glinting beneath the pale sun. Cassian walked beside her, silent for a while. Finally, he said, "You did it." Elara exhaled slowly. "No, we did." They reached the car, the city stretching out before them. For the first time in months, she felt the weight lift from her shoulders. The war was over, not because she had destroyed her enemy, but because she had refused to become him. As the car pulled away, Cassian reached for her hand. What now? Elara looked out at the horizon where the mountains met the sky. "Now we build something real," he smiled. "Together?" "Always." The city faded behind them, the lake shimmering like glass. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a beginning. And as the plane carried them home that evening, Elara closed her eyes and let herself breathe, not as a survivor, not as a fighter, but as a woman finally free from the ghosts that had haunted her. The past was finished. The reckoning was done. Tomorrow would belong to them. The city greeted them with rain. Sheets of it fell against the car windows as Elara and Cassian drove from the airport, the skyline blurred into streaks of silver and shadow. It felt almost poetic. Geneva had been all sharp edges and clarity, but home was soft, uncertain, alive. Elara watched the droplets race down the glass, her reflection fractured in the movement. "It feels different," she murmured. Cassian glanced at her. "What does?" "Everything. The city, the air, me." He smiled faintly. "That's because you're not running anymore." She turned to him, her voice quiet. "Maybe, or maybe I'm just tired of fighting." He reached across the console, his fingers brushing hers. "Then don't fight. Just live." The words lingered between them, simple and impossible. When they reached Vance Tower, the lobby was nearly empty. The staff greeted her with cautious smiles, respectful, uncertain. The news of Hale's confession had already spread. The markets were stabilizing, the board was silent, and for the first time in months, there were no fires to put out. But peace, Elara knew, was never permanent. In her office, the city lights shimmered through the rain. She stood by the window, the same place she had stood through every victory and every loss. Cassian joined her, setting 2 cups of coffee on the table. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" he asked. "All the time," she said. "But I don't know what it looks like yet," he nodded. "Maybe that's the point." She turned to him. "You sound like someone who's already decided." "I have," he said. "I'm leaving the company." The words hit her harder than she expected. "Leaving?" He nodded. "I've been thinking about it for a while. I came back to help you finish this. We did. Now it's time for something else." Alara's throat tightened. "And what is that?" He smiled softly. "Something quieter. Something real." She looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "You think I can do this without you?" "I know you can," he said. "You already have." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with everything they weren't saying. Finally she asked, "When?" "Soon," he said, "but not tonight." They stayed there for a long time, watching the rain blur the city into watercolor. The storm outside was fading, but inside something deeper was shifting, an understanding, a release. Later, when the office was dark and the city had gone quiet, Elara walked through the empty halls. Every step echoed with memory. The boardroom battles, the sleepless nights, the moments of triumph and despair. She paused at the glass doors, her reflection staring back at her. For the first time, she didn't see the woman who had built an empire. She saw the woman who had survived it. The next morning, she arrived early. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets washed clean. The air smelled of renewal. Mara was already at her desk, sorting through reports. "Morning, Miss Vance." Elara smiled. "Morning, Mara. How's the team?" "Better," Mara said. "Relieved? It feels like we can breathe again." Elara nodded. "Good. Keep it that way." She spent the morning reviewing proposals, approving budgets, answering messages. The rhythm was familiar, almost comforting. But beneath it all, she felt the quiet hum of change. At noon, Cassian appeared in her doorway. "Lunch?" She looked up, surprised. "You're still here." He grinned. "You didn't think I'd leave without saying goodbye, did you?" They walked to a small cafe a few blocks away, one they used to visit before everything fell apart. The same waiter greeted them. The same corner table waited. It felt like stepping into another life. Over coffee and quiet conversation, they talked about everything except the company. Books, travel, the sea. For the first time in years, Elara laughed without restraint. When they finished, Cassian leaned back, studying her. You know, you could leave too, she smiled. And do what? Anything. You've earned it. Elara looked out the window, the sunlight breaking through the clouds. Maybe someday, but not yet. There's still work to do. He nodded. Then promise me one thing. What? That when you finally walk away, make sure it's because you want to, not because you're running. She met his gaze. I promise. They walked back to the tower in silence. At the entrance, Cassian stopped. This is it. Elara felt the ache rise in her chest. You'll keep in touch? Always, he said. You know where to find me. He turned to go, but she caught his hand, Cassian. He looked back. Thank you, she said, for everything. He smiled, the kind of smile that carried both endings and beginnings. You don't owe me thanks, Elara. Just live. And then he was gone. Elara stood there for a long time, watching the crowd swallow him. The city moved around her, alive and indifferent, but she felt something she hadn't in years, peace. When she returned to her office, the sun had broken fully through the clouds. The light spilled across her desk, warm and golden. She sat down, opened her notebook, and began to write, not reports, not strategies, but thoughts. What does it mean to rebuild? What does it mean to be free? The words came slowly, but they came. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Inside, Elara Vance began again, not as the woman who conquered, but as the woman who endured. And somewhere beyond the skyline, Cassian walked into his own tomorrow, carrying the same quiet hope. The storm had passed. What remained was the quiet, the kind that comes only after everything has been broken and remade. The morning sun spilled through the glass walls of Vance Tower, painting the office in soft gold. The city below was alive again. Horns, footsteps, the hum of 1,000 beginnings. Elara stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the light move across the skyline. It had been 3 weeks since Cassian left. 3 weeks since she had stood in this same spot and promised herself she would not run anymore. The days had been full. Meetings, decisions, rebuilding. But the silence between them had changed. It was no longer heavy, it was space. Mara entered quietly, a folder in her hands. Morning, Miss Vance. The quarterly reports are ready. Elara smiled. Thank you, Mara. How's the team? Focused, hopeful. It feels different now. Elara nodded. It should. When Mara left, Elara opened the folder but didn't read it. Her eyes drifted to the small photograph on her desk, a picture taken years ago before everything fell apart. She and Cassian stood side by side at a charity gala, both smiling, both unaware of what was coming. She traced the edge of the frame with her thumb. You were right, she whispered. It was never about winning. The intercom buzzed. Miss Vance, there's someone here to see you. Who? He wouldn't give his name, says you'll want to see him. Elara hesitated. Send him in. The door opened, and for a heartbeat she forgot how to breathe. Cassian stood there, rain still clinging to his coat, his hair damp, his eyes the same steady gray she remembered. Hello, Elara, she rose slowly. You're supposed to be in Lisbon. I was, he said, but I heard about the new foundation, thought I'd see it for myself. She smiled faintly. You could have called. I could have, he said, but I wanted to see you. The air between them shifted, familiar, charged, fragile. He stepped closer. You've done it. The company's stable. The board's quiet. The press is calling you the architect of a new era. Elara laughed softly. They always need a headline. You earned it, he said. She looked at him, her voice quiet. And you? Did you find what you were looking for? He hesitated. Not yet. I thought I needed distance. Turns out I just needed perspective. Elara tilted her head. And what did you see? You, he said simply, still standing. The words caught her off guard. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Cassian smiled. You look different. Lighter. I feel different, she said. For the first time, I'm not building something to prove I can. I'm building something because I want to. He nodded toward the papers on her desk. The foundation? She handed him a brochure. The Vance Initiative for Ethical Innovation. It's not about profit, she said. It's about purpose. Grants for startups that want to do things differently. No shortcuts, no corruption, just integrity. Cassian turned the brochure over in his hands. You're changing the rules. Someone has to. He looked up, his expression soft. You always were the brave one, Elara smiled. No, I was just the one who refused to stay broken. They stood in silence for a moment, the city humming around them. Finally, Cassian said, I'm not here to stay. Not yet, but I wanted to tell you something before I go. Elara's heart tightened. What? He stepped closer, his voice low. You were right. It was never about control, it was about truth, and you taught me that. She met his gaze. And you taught me how to fight for it. He smiled. Then I guess we're even. Elara took a breath. Where will you go? Wherever the work takes me, he said. There's a project in Nairobi. Renewable tech, real change. She nodded. That sounds like you. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and placed a small envelope on her desk. For when you're ready to stop building and start living. She frowned. What is it? Plane tickets, he said. Lisbon. Open-ended. Elara looked down at the envelope, then back at him. You think I'll come? I think you'll know when it's time. He turned to leave, but she stopped him. Cassian, he looked back. Thank you, she said, for believing in me when I didn't. He smiled, the kind of smile that carried both memory and promise. Always. When he was gone, the office felt both emptier and fuller. Elara sat at her desk, the envelope still in her hand. Outside, the rain had stopped, and sunlight spilled across the city. She opened the envelope. 2 tickets, no dates, no destination beyond the name of a city that had once meant escape. She placed them in her drawer, not as a plan, but as a possibility. Then she turned back to the window. The skyline shimmered, alive and endless. For the first time, she didn't feel the weight of it pressing down. She felt it lifting her. The world was still imperfect, still ruthless, still loud, but she had learned how to stand in it without losing herself. Elara Vance smiled. The kind of smile that came from peace, not victory. The storm had passed, the light had returned, and somewhere beyond the horizon, a new story was waiting to begin. The city was waking when Elara stepped out of the car. The air was cool, touched with the faint scent of rain and the promise of spring. She stood for a moment on the sidewalk outside the Vance Foundation's new headquarters, watching the sunlight spill across the glass facade. It was smaller than the tower she had once ruled, but it felt alive, in a way the old empire never had. Inside, the lobby buzzed with quiet energy. Young teams moved between workstations, their voices low but eager. The walls were lined with photographs of projects already underway: solar grids in rural towns, clean water systems, education programs for women in tech. Every image was a reminder that something good could grow from ruin. Mara met her at the elevator, tablet in hand. Morning, Miss Vance. The board call is at 9, and the press wants a statement about the Nairobi partnership. Elara smiled. Tell them they'll get it when it's ready. Mara grinned. You sound like Cassian. The name still carried warmth. He'd say the same thing, wouldn't he? Probably, Mara said. He called last week, said the project's ahead of schedule. Elara's heart lifted. Good, he deserves that. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped into the top floor, a wide, open space filled with light. Elara's office was simple now. A desk, a few plants, a wall of windows overlooking the city. No marble, no gold, no symbols of power, just clarity. She set her bag down and looked out at the skyline. The same city that had once devoured her now felt like something she could finally breathe in. Mara lingered by the door. You've got a visitor waiting in the conference room. Who? She wouldn't say. Just that it's important. Elara frowned but nodded. Send her in. A few minutes later, a woman entered. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, calm presence. She extended a hand. Dr. Lian Zhou. I run the Global Ethics Consortium. Elara shook her hand. I've read your work. I've read yours, Zhou said. You've built something remarkable here. We'd like to partner with you. Elara gestured for her to sit. What kind of partnership? Zhou smiled. We're launching an initiative to train corporate leaders in ethical governance. We want the Vance Foundation to lead it. Elara hesitated. You want me to teach ethics? Zhou's eyes softened. Who better than someone who's lived both sides of it? The words struck deep. For a moment, Elara saw flashes of her past, the boardrooms, the betrayals, the nights spent wondering if redemption was even possible. She nodded slowly. Tell me more. They spoke for an hour, mapping out ideas, possibilities, the shape of something new. When Zhou left, Elara stood by the window again, the city gleaming below. Mara entered quietly. That sounded promising. It is, Elara said. It's time to stop rebuilding and start teaching others how not to break things in the first place. Mara smiled. That sounds like a mission. It is, Elara said. And this time, it's one worth fighting for. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and calls. By evening, the office was empty. Elara stayed behind, the quiet settling around her like a familiar friend. She opened her drawer and took out the envelope Cassian had left. The tickets were still there, untouched. She turned one over in her hand, tracing the embossed letters. Lisbon. The phone on her desk buzzed, a message from an unknown number. The sunsets here are still waiting for you. Her breath caught. She typed back before she could think. Maybe it's time I saw them. The reply came almost instantly. Then come. Elara looked out at the city one last time. The lights shimmered like constellations, each one a story she had helped rewrite. She closed her laptop, slipped the tickets into her bag, and walked out. The night air was cool against her skin. The streets were alive, but she moved through them with ease, no longer chased by ghosts. At the airport, she didn't hesitate. The attendant scanned her ticket, and the gate opened with a soft chime. Hours later, as the plane lifted into the dark, Elara watched the city shrink beneath her. The horizon stretched ahead, endless and bright. When the first light of dawn touched the clouds, she smiled. The past was behind her. The future was waiting. And somewhere beyond the sky, Cassian was waiting too. The world had broken her once. Now she was ready to build something new. Not an empire, but a life. The plane landed in Lisbon just as the sun began to rise. The city glowed in soft amber light, the rooftops glistening from the night's rain. Elara stepped out of the terminal, the air warm and salt-sweet. It smelled like possibility. Cassian was waiting by the arrivals gate, hands in his pockets, a quiet smile on his face. "You came," he said. "I told you I would." He studied her for a moment. "You look different." "So do you," she said. "You look happy." "I am," he said, "but I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," she admitted, "until I realized I didn't want to keep wondering what if." He nodded, his eyes soft. "Then let's not wonder anymore." They walked through the narrow streets of the old city, the cobblestones slick beneath their feet. The air was filled with the sound of church bells and the scent of coffee drifting from open cafes. Cassian led her to a small terrace overlooking the river. The view was breathtaking, the water shimmering gold, the city unfolding in layers of color and history. "This is where I come to think," he said, "when I need to remember why I started over." Elara leaned against the railing. "And do you remember?" He smiled. Every day, they stood in silence for a while, the wind tugging at her hair. Finally, she said, "I thought I'd feel lost without the company, without the fight. And do you?" She shook her head. "No, I feel free." Cassian turned to her. "You earned that." She looked at him, her voice quiet. "So did you." He reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "So what now?" Elara smiled. "Now we build something that doesn't need saving." He laughed softly. "That sounds like a plan." They spent the day walking through the city, past markets and plazas, through narrow alleys where music spilled from open windows. Everywhere they went, Elara felt the pulse of life, unhurried and unbroken. By evening, they found themselves on the cliffs above the sea. The sun was sinking, painting the horizon in fire and gold. Cassian sat beside her, the wind carrying the scent of salt and wildflowers. "You know," he said, "I used to think peace was something you found. Now I think it's something you build." Elara nodded, brick by brick. He looked at her, his expression soft. "You're not going back, are you?" She shook her head. "No, the foundation will run itself. It's time for something new." Cassian smiled. "Then stay." She turned to him, the last light of the sun catching in her eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that." He reached for her hand again, and this time she didn't let go. The waves crashed below them, steady and endless. The sky deepened into violet, the first stars appearing above the water. For the first time in years, Elara felt no weight, no fear, no unfinished business, just the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Cassian leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "Welcome home." Elara smiled, her heart steady. "Home," she repeated. The horizon stretched before them, vast and luminous. The world was still imperfect, still uncertain, but it was theirs. And as the last light faded into night, Elara Vance finally understood that freedom wasn't the absence of struggle. It was the choice to begin again. The storm was long gone. The fire had burned out. What remained was light. The morning light spilled through the curtains, soft and golden, touching the edges of the room with warmth. Elara stirred, the sound of the sea drifting through the open window. For a moment, she didn't move. The rhythm of the waves, the distant call of gulls, the scent of salt and coffee, it all felt like a dream she didn't want to wake from. Cassian was already up. She could hear him in the kitchen, humming quietly as he poured water into the kettle. The sound was ordinary, domestic, and yet it filled her with a peace she had never known. When she finally rose, she found him standing by the window, 2 mugs in hand. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "Morning," he said, his voice low and easy. "Morning," she replied, taking the cup he offered. "You're up early." "Old habits," he said. "I like watching the city wake up." Elara smiled. "You used to hate mornings." "I used to hate a lot of things," he said. "Turns out I just needed a different view." They stood together, watching the sunlight spill across the rooftops of Lisbon. The city was alive but unhurried, its rhythm slower, more forgiving. Elara took a sip of her coffee. "I keep thinking about how far we've come, how much we lost, how much we found again." Cassian nodded. "It doesn't feel real sometimes." "It does to me," she said. "For the first time, it does." He looked at her, his expression soft. "You're not going back, are you?" She shook her head. "No. The foundation is in good hands. Mara's running it better than I ever could. I'll still advise, but I don't need to be there every day." Cassian smiled. "You finally let go." "I had to," she said. "If I kept holding on, I'd never have room for anything else." They finished their coffee in silence, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Later, they walked through the narrow streets, the cobblestones still damp from the night's rain. Vendors were setting up their stalls, the air rich with the scent of bread and oranges. Children ran past, laughing, their voices echoing off the walls. Elara paused at a small bookstore tucked between 2 cafes. The window display was filled with old volumes, their spines faded but proud. She stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. Cassian followed, watching as she ran her fingers along the shelves. "Looking for something?" "Not really," she said, "just remembering." He smiled. "You used to do this in New York, hide in bookstores when the world got too loud." She laughed. "Some habits are worth keeping." She pulled out a worn copy of a philosophy book and flipped through the pages. A line caught her eye. "Freedom is not the absence of responsibility, but the courage to choose it." She closed the book slowly. "That's it," she said. "That's what I've been trying to understand." Cassian tilted his head. "And now you do?" "I think so," she said. "Freedom isn't walking away, it's walking toward something better." He nodded. "Then what are we walking toward?" Elara smiled. "Whatever comes next." They left the shop and wandered toward the waterfront. The sun was high now, the river glittering like glass. Street musicians played soft melodies, and the air was filled with laughter and life. Cassian stopped at a small cafe overlooking the water. "Lunch?" "Only if you promise not to talk about work," she said. He grinned. "Deal." They sat outside, the breeze warm against their skin. The waiter brought fresh bread, olives, and wine. For a while they talked about nothing: books, travel, the absurdity of pigeons stealing food from tourists. It was simple, and it was enough. When the plates were cleared, Cassian leaned back, watching her. "You know, I used to think peace was something you earned, like a reward after the fight." "And now?" she asked. "Now I think it's something you choose. Every day." Elara nodded. "Then let's keep choosing it." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "Always." The afternoon stretched into evening. They walked along the cliffs as the sun began to set, the sky painted in shades of gold and rose. The wind carried the scent of the sea, and the world felt vast and quiet. Elara stopped at the edge, looking out at the horizon. "Do you ever think about what comes after this?" Cassian joined her. "Sometimes, but I try not to plan too far ahead. Life has a way of surprising us." She smiled. "It does." He turned to her, his voice soft. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." She met his gaze. Together. The sun dipped below the water, the last light fading into twilight. The waves rolled against the rocks below, steady and eternal. Elara closed her eyes, breathing in the salt air. For the first time in years, she felt whole, not because everything was perfect, but because she had learned to live with imperfection. The world had broken her once, but she had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, into something stronger, quieter, truer. Cassian slipped his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him. The horizon stretched before them, endless and bright. Tomorrow would come, as it always did. But tonight, there was only stillness, the kind that comes after the storm, when the world finally exhales. And in that stillness, Elara Vance found what she had been searching for all along. Not victory, not redemption. Peace. The morning began with the sound of church bells drifting through the open window. Elara lay awake, listening to them echo across the hills, each note soft and deliberate. The air smelled faintly of salt and citrus, the scent of the sea mixing with the warmth of the city below. Cassian was already gone. A note rested on the nightstand, written in his careful hand. Down by the harbor. Bring your sketchbook. She smiled. He had been teasing her for weeks about the small leather-bound book she carried everywhere, filled with half-finished thoughts and sketches of places they'd seen. She dressed quickly, tying her hair back, and stepped out into the sunlight. The streets were alive with color. Vendors called out in Portuguese, their stalls overflowing with fruit and flowers. Musicians played on corners, their songs weaving through the hum of the crowd. Elara moved through it all with quiet ease, her steps unhurried. When she reached the harbor, Cassian was waiting near the edge of the pier, a camera slung around his neck. The water shimmered beneath him, the boats rocking gently in the tide. "You're late," he said, smiling. "I stopped for coffee," she replied, holding up 2 cups. "One for you." He took it, brushing his fingers against hers. "You're forgiven." They sat on the edge of the pier, legs dangling above the water. The sun was climbing higher, turning the surface of the river into a sheet of gold. Cassian lifted his camera, snapping a photo of the boats. "You ever think about how strange it is, how we ended up here?" Elara smiled faintly. "Every day." He lowered the camera. "Do you miss it? The noise, the power, the rush?" She thought for a moment. "Sometimes, but not the way I used to. I miss the challenge, not the chaos." He nodded. "You were always chasing something bigger." "I still am," she said. "It's just not about control anymore. It's about meaning." Cassian looked at her, his expression soft. "You found it." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I just stopped looking for it in the wrong places." They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the waves filling the space between them. Elara opened her sketchbook and began to draw. The curve of the boats, the reflection of the sun on the water, the faint outline of Cassian's profile beside her. He watched her work, his voice quiet. "You're different when you draw." "How so?" "Calmer, like the world finally makes sense." She smiled. "Maybe it does." When she finished, she turned the book toward him. The sketch was simple but alive, the harbor, the light, the 2 of them sitting side by side. Cassian studied it for a long moment. "You should show these to people. They're just sketches. They're more than that," he said. "They're pieces of you." Elara closed the book gently. "Maybe someday." They spent the rest of the morning wandering through the market, buying bread and fruit, talking about everything and nothing. The world felt wide open, unhurried. By afternoon, they had climbed the hill to the old fortress overlooking the city. The view stretched endlessly, the red rooftops, the river winding toward the sea, the horizon glowing in the distance. Cassian leaned against the stone wall, watching her. "You know, I used to think we were defined by what we built. The companies, the deals, the victories. And now," she asked, "now I think we're defined by what we choose to keep." Elara turned to him. "And what have you kept?" He smiled. "You." The words hung in the air, simple and true. She stepped closer, the wind tugging at her hair. "Then I guess I've kept you too." They stood there as the sun began to set, the city bathed in long light. The sky turned from gold to rose to deep violet, the first stars appearing above the water. Cassian took her hand. "You ever think about what comes next?" Elara looked out at the horizon. "Not in plans, just in moments. I want to keep building things that matter. Maybe teach, maybe write, maybe just live." He nodded. "All of it sounds right." She smiled. "And you?" "I'll keep working on the projects, but I don't want to do it alone anymore." Elara met his gaze. "You won't have to." The last light faded, leaving only the glow of the city below. The bells began again, distant and steady. Elara closed her eyes, listening. The sound was no longer a reminder of endings, but of rhythm, of life continuing, of time moving forward. When she opened them, Cassian was watching her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That this is what peace feels like. Not silence. Just balance." He smiled. Then let's hold on to it. They walked back down the hill hand in hand, the city lights flickering around them. The night was warm, the air filled with the scent of jasmine and sea. For the first time, Elara didn't feel like she was standing at the edge of something uncertain. She felt grounded, steady, whole. The world had changed, and so had she. As they reached the harbor again, Cassian stopped, turning to face her. "You know," he said, "I think this is only the beginning." Elara smiled, her eyes bright in the lamplight. "Then let's begin." The waves rolled against the pier, the stars shimmered above, and the city breathed around them, alive, imperfect, eternal. And in that moment, beneath the long light of a new chapter, Elara Vance finally understood that the end of one story was never truly an ending. It was the quiet beginning of another. Chapter 22, The Quiet Promise. The morning mist rolled in from the sea, soft and silver, wrapping the harbor in a veil of calm. Elara stood on the balcony of their small apartment, a cup of tea warming her hands. Below, the city stirred awake, vendors setting up stalls, fishermen calling to one another, the faint hum of life beginning again. Cassian joined her, his hair still damp from the shower, a towel slung over his shoulder. "You're up early," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "I couldn't stay in bed," she replied. The light was too beautiful. He leaned on the railing beside her, following her gaze toward the horizon. "You've always chased the light." "Maybe because I spent too long in the dark," she said softly. Cassian reached for her hand, his thumb brushing against her knuckles. "You're not there anymore." "I know," she said, "but sometimes I still feel it, like a shadow that doesn't quite fade." He nodded. "Maybe it's not supposed to. Maybe it's what reminds us how far we've come." They stood in silence for a while, the sound of the waves below filling the space between them. The city was alive, but their little corner of it felt suspended in stillness. Later that morning, they walked through the narrow streets toward the Foundation's new Lisbon office. It was small, just a few rooms above a cafe, but it was enough. Elara had decided to open a branch there, focusing on local sustainability projects and youth mentorship. Mara had insisted she take a step back, but Elara couldn't resist being involved. She didn't want control anymore. She wanted connection. Inside, the office smelled of fresh paint and coffee. A handful of young volunteers were already at work, sorting through files and planning community events. When they saw Elara, they smiled, their energy contagious. "Morning, Miss Vance," one of them called. "Just Elara," she corrected gently. "How's everything going?" "Better than expected," another said. "The coastal cleanup starts next week. We've already got 50 volunteers signed up." Elara's eyes lit up. "That's wonderful. Make sure they have everything they need: transport, supplies, safety gear." Cassian watched her with quiet admiration. She moved through the room with ease, offering advice, encouragement, and the occasional laugh. The woman who once commanded boardrooms now inspired through presence, not power. When the meeting ended, they stepped outside into the sunlight. Cassian slipped his arm around her shoulders. "You look happy." "I am," she said. "It feels good to build something that doesn't belong to me." He smiled. "That's the difference, isn't it? Before, everything had to be yours. Now it just has to matter." She nodded. "Exactly." They spent the afternoon walking along the waterfront, stopping at a small cafe for lunch. The owner, an elderly woman named Sophia, greeted them warmly and insisted they try her homemade pastries. As they ate, Sophia sat with them, telling stories about the city, its storms, its festivals, its quiet resilience. Elara listened, captivated. There was something grounding about hearing someone speak of a place with such love. When Sophia left to serve another table, Cassian leaned closer. "You're thinking about something." Elara smiled. "Always. I was just wondering what it would be like to stay here. Not just for a while, but for good." Cassian's eyes softened. "You mean it?" She nodded. "I do. For the first time, I don't feel like I'm running toward or away from anything. I just want to be here." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "Then we'll stay." The words settled between them like a promise. That evening, they returned to the cliffs where they had watched the sunset days before. The sky was streaked with gold and violet, the sea calm and endless. Elara sat on the edge, her knees drawn to her chest. "Do you ever think about what we'll be like years from now?" Cassian sat beside her. "Sometimes. I think we'll still be here, maybe a little older, a little slower, but still chasing the light." she smiled, and still arguing about who makes better coffee. He laughed. You'll never admit it's me, because it isn't, she said, nudging him playfully. The laughter faded into quiet, the kind of quiet that felt full rather than empty. The wind carried the scent of salt and wildflowers, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Cassian turned to her, his voice low. You know, I used to think happiness was something that happened to you. Now I think it's something you build, moment by moment. Elara looked at him, her eyes bright in the fading light. Then let's keep building. He smiled. Always. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a trail of fire that slowly faded into dusk. The first stars appeared, faint but steady. Elara leaned her head against Cassian's shoulder, her heart steady and full. The city lights flickered below, the sea whispered against the rocks, and for the first time in her life she felt no need to move, to chase, to prove. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The quiet promise of the night wrapped around them, gentle and sure. And as the stars deepened above the sea, Elara Vance knew that peace wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of everything that would come next.